Cool. So my name is Corey MacArthur. Here's a little bit what we're going to talk about today. A little bit about Sworkit, about me, about Ionic 4. I'm going to show you some stuff that we're doing at Sworkit, as some JavaScript examples of Ionic 4 as well. And hopefully we can have a Q&A throughout. I don't want to just wait till the end for questions, so please stop me along the way. We already had some questions here about Ionic in general, so like if something doesn't make sense, please raise your hand. But most of you guys have developed in Ionic before, right? Has anyone tried V4 yet or looked at documentation? We've got one guy back there. Okay, so one of the things I love the most about Ionic is that the community is awesome. Like I just sent a tweet out this week to say, hey, what are you guys interested in? And we had like a couple hundred responses saying, hey, we want to learn more about Ionic V4. So that's kind of what I'm talking about today. And we're recording it too, so it's going to go to the Ionic Worldwide stuff. I have a product design background. I actually graduated from BYU. I'm a Mormon boy here from Utah, and went into UX and self-taught in development through Ionic. In fact, like Ionic is what got me interested in AngularJS. So I learned AngularJS because of Ionic. And then when Ionic released their V2 or V3 that had like the material design in Angular 2, like I learned Angular 2 just because I wanted to get that material design in my apps. So I've been developing in Ionic for quite some time, and it's almost been a year now. I got hired as a UX engineer at Sworkit. So I'm working remote. Our whole team is working remote, and I work in Ionic V4 all day right now. So a little bit about Sworkit. We started back in like 2012. You can see we talked a little bit earlier today about jQuery Mobile. Our first version of the app was a jQuery Mobile app. It's come a long way. You can see since then, this is kind of our user growth. Downloads per day. It's a little outdated. This is 2016 on the right here. But Ionic came in about 2014, right before this big ramp. And so now we're finally rewriting Ionic, or rewriting the Sworkit app in Ionic V4. We're actually not doing it in Angular. We're using Ionic and Stencil. We talked a little bit about Stencil at our last meetup, so I won't be going too much into Stencil today. And then our backend is Firebase mostly. Like our user data is all stored in Firebase, and then we have some Rails apps to get like our workout data and stuff like that. But all of our front end is built in Ionic, and we're excited to be rewriting it in V4. Our tech team is only 3 of us, plus one that just got hired like this week. I'm not putting his name on here because I don't know if he's told his current employer yet. But one of the cool things about Ionic is because we're doing this in JavaScript, HTML, CSS, like, and we're writing it once in Ionic code, and we are deploying it to iOS, Android, and the web. We can still have a very small development team and have an app that serves millions of users. We have like anywhere between 1 million and 1.5 million monthly active users on our Sworkit app. And people have asked us before, like, or people kind of assume that Ionic is a startup thing. Like you're going to use Ionic when you only have a couple thousand users, and then you're going to go native as you scale. But we've decided again to reinvest in Ionic, and even though we're rewriting the app, we're going to go Ionic again because it helps us in so many ways. It gives us this cross-platform design language translation, right? You write it once, it looks different on an Android device than it does on an iOS device. It gives it a high-quality experience across platforms, and like I said, we can create more features with less engineers. So here's Ionic V4. If you're familiar with Ionic, they originally started in AngularJS, right? Angular. Right now, the production version of Ionic is in Angular 4, I believe. Maybe it's upgraded to Angular 5. And you were writing an Angular app using Ionic components, and the Ionic components were Angular components. So if you didn't use Angular, you couldn't use Ionic. The biggest difference with V4 is that they're decoupling themselves from Angular, and they're still very much pro-Angular, right? Still build the app in Angular if that's what you want to do, but the web components can be used anywhere. And I'm going to show a lot of examples about how you could use Angular or Ionic V4 without using Angular. So it can be used with any framework. They're going to create an Ionic Angular, or they're working on the Ionic Angular bridge, probably an Ionic Vue and Ionic React. Even there's a big community around wanting all of those actually. They're written using web standard custom elements, and polyfills are added and loaded only as needed. So as you load an Ionic PWA, an Ionic app in the web browser, the older browsers that don't support custom elements will actually load the polyfills that are needed. This works on IE11 and up, and so like you're getting really good coverage on that. The new Ionic uses Shadow DOM. Is anyone familiar with what Shadow DOM is? Probably could explain it better than I can. So Shadow DOM, basically it gives you like, think of like an iframe. You know, you can embed a site in an iframe, and any CSS or JavaScript can't really influence that iframe. Shadow DOM is kind of like that. That's a very rudimentary like explanation, but it gives you view encapsulation. So in an Ionic component, like if you're trying to style it with standard CSS classes, it won't let you. So it helps you separate your concerns of JavaScript mixing with each other, as well as with CSS that shouldn't be messing with the styles. And sometimes you get performance benefits on these if you have really, really big apps. I've read some stuff that says otherwise, but who knows? I haven't gotten that big, nor have I measured it. But so the biggest difference for me going to V4 is, because a lot of the syntax still looks the same, but to style your Ionic elements, it's no longer just find the class and style it. You have to style it through CSS variables. And I'll show you kind of some of the things that we do there to make that happen. Okay, so I know I'm going to go into some kind of Sworkit demos of how we're using Ionic V4. First of all, in our app, we have on a larger screen. So if you go to, in fact, I'm going to show you guys. If I go to like Sworkit beta or beta.sworkit.com, I have this left-hand side pane that's full screen, and then if I like go onto a smaller device, that becomes a menu, right? So even though I'm creating this split pane with one set of code, it actually transforms really well across all different sizes for the browser. And what that looks like in HTML is split pane. This guy is really just HTML, right? So here is a code pen. If you're familiar with code pen, you can write HTML in the top. You can write CSS in the middle. I haven't written any HTML, any CSS, and I haven't written any JavaScript. And all I'm doing is adding these web components. The reason that it is working is because in my settings, I'm just loading this unpackaged file from Ionic V4 Alpha 10. I think they're on Alpha 11 now. But you can see like I get that same responsiveness I was showing you before. If it gets smaller, it'll collapse. I can tab through this. It's like already has some interactability here, which is really cool. I love, that's one of the coolest things I think about V4 is because it's all HTML web components. Like someone like your son here, it's Rodrigo, right? Rogelio.
Isaac.
And Isaac. So he could start writing an Ionic app. Like I went to ngConf about a month ago, and we taught some group of 8 to 12-year-olds this right here. Like I said, hey guys, we're going to build a tabs app, and they came in here and they all like created their own little like, their own tabs. They added their own icons. I showed them the Ionicons website so they could change the tabs and they could add their own content to each page. So within like 15, 30 minutes, each one of them like went home with this homemade app that they built, and they got it, right?
And these web components you're using, they're all the ones that start with the Ionic, I guess, they're Ionic package, right? I mean, you didn't write your custom web components yet.
Exactly. So I haven't added any components myself, and the only thing I've loaded is Ionic components. And all of the Ionic components are prefixed with Ion. So yeah, it's wrapped in an Ion app. It has an Ion split pane, and like I'm showing here, like I'm not even adding any CSS, right? So it's pretty slick stuff, and like, I mean, web has moved a long way. So I can't wait for my kids to get like another year or two older, because they could start plinking on these kinds of things and coming up with apps, really quick. So I mentioned one of the biggest changes is how styling happens in Ionic v4, because you're not targeting classes, you're actually doing it through CSS variables. And this just barely happened within the last, I want to say like 2 weeks when they switched over to Shadow DOM, so that it can work on other frameworks. So in our Sworkit app, I just created this like little style guide, and it kind of helps us visualize what actually comes with Ionic, and then like what colors we should be using. And so I did the same thing for this little demo, where here I have the color palette of Ionic, and if I wanted to change the colors, there's a list of CSS variables that you'd come in and change, right? So if I want to change the primary color to red, like that's going to update to red. The primary action here is going to update to red, and it would update everywhere within the app. The other cool thing that we just took advantage of is the font family, right? So if I don't load an initial font, the whole app will just be, I think the default is like Times New Roman or something, right? But if I want to change the whole look of my app, all I got to do is change that variable to say, hey, I want Helvetica New to be used throughout every single component, right? And I could do the same thing for colors. They do it for some padding and heights, and each one of these components has their own kind of API through this CSS variables, which is really, it's been a little difficult to make that switch, but I'm loving it because you change it in one place and it's everywhere, and there's no more like searching through classes and trying to manipulate classes. You're just updating the variable, and then it overrides inside the component itself.
Is it still based on using the Sass compiler to convert those?
So these are actually supported in, I don't know who supports them, but no, like you don't need Sass for this. This is a CSS thing. So Ionic, the team uses Sass. A lot of the PWAs that you guys see out there are just using CSS. Yeah. The stencil ones, they decoupled Sass from stencil. So if you want to use Sass, you can. If you don't want to, you don't have to. We're using Sass because it's easy. It's nice to nest styles, and when you're creating your own components and styling your own elements, I find it a lot easier to do that than add extra classes. I did that one already, CSS variables. Oh, I actually did want to point this out though. So one of the biggest benefits of using Ionic is this cross-platform translation. So you'll see in all of these screenshots I'm sharing that I have on the left here an Android version, and on the right an iOS version. Actually, these ones are flip-flopped. The iOS version is on the left, the Android's on the right. It's mostly, I mean, these are minor differences, right? But you'll see that the icon for menus is a little different. The icons are coming from material design icons, so it's following the material design guidelines versus human interface design guidelines, which is what Apple does here on the left. And as you click around on an Android app, I'll show you, like, you get this kind of hover animation that happens as you click on the tabs. Any Android users here? So you're used to that, right? It like transitions in when you hit tabs if you're like browsing through your YouTube app, right? That's not really something that happens on iOS. So on iOS it doesn't have that, and it doesn't use the material design icons. It actually uses an icon language that's more familiar with iOS, that kind of jives with the system. Next is tabs. There's another example or these aren't tabs. This is like a segmented control. That's what iOS calls them. So where I have today, week, and all time, on Android, it's going to be tabs here across the top. And so you write it once, and it looks one way on iOS, one way on Android. And iOS users are familiar with these tabs. It's in the Settings app. It's in a lot of their familiar apps. It's actually a component that comes as developers are coding it in Swift, right? It's very familiar. Here's what like more interactive things would look like. I showed you some of these static assets, such as the tabs. Oh, sorry, we're getting ahead of myself. These tabs are kind of, they're just static HTML, but if I'm starting to add things like action sheets, there's a little more JavaScript involved, right? So I'll just kind of walk through this code here. Can you guys see this okay? Is it worth walking through? So you'd call the function of presenting an action sheet. You can use the document query selector to get the Ion action sheet controller, and then, or in Angular, you'd probably import that as a dependency. And then you await till that component's ready, and then you can pass these properties into create this action sheet. You give it a header, you give it some button text, you got text role, whether it's destructive or if you take that off, the color doesn't change. You can give it an icon, and then you can have a handler. So when it's clicked, is it going to delete something? Is it going to add something? And then once this is all loaded, you can just present your action sheet with action sheet.present. Right, so here's kind of an example of that. If I have it open, oh, it's right here. So again, the only thing I've done here is I've added I think I added CSS just to get this main page shown. But in vanilla JavaScript, I don't even have to add any dependencies like Angular, or I don't have to load Angular at all. And I can create this action sheet that shows up with some icons. And then if I run this or emulate it as an iPhone device or an iPad, let's rotate it to make it a little bigger. In fact, all I gotta do is load it as an iPhone, and then I can make it bigger, and it should work. Yep. You'll notice, this is familiar to iOS users, right? The action sheet comes up, your cancel button is separated from the rest of the list items. You have rounded corners and a backdrop that's all clickable to dismiss it. Alrighty, so here's an example in the Sworkit app. So if I tap up here in the top right to edit a workout, I can copy this full body workout and edit it myself. On an iOS device, even the icons are a little different, right? That's a material design icon. This is an iOS icon for editing. And then that's the same thing for copy, right? And I have added very little / no like extra stuff. Oh, in fact, my cancel button's off center there. So for modals, we do this in a couple places in our Sworkit app, and I want to kind of show this off because modals I like modals. They're kind of fun for adding advanced settings, or they're basically temporary data before, like if you're trying to add something or create a workout or edit a workout in our instance that I'm going to show you. And in Ionic 1, you could only present a modal and dismiss it. If you wanted to, you couldn't really like add additional views to that modal. So I showed Todd this. I tried to launch a modal, and then I'd put a modal on top of a modal, and like I tried to fake it to look like they were together, but in fact they were just like stacked on top of each other. So like the overlay just kept getting darker. But in Ionic v4, you can do that really easily. You just pass the component, ion nav. The root is going to be a component itself, so that's just the component tag. SW edit workout page is its own standalone component. And then the root parameters are something that we may or may not need. Well, we need it for ours, but you wouldn't necessarily need to pass this. And then I can present this modal, and it'll launch up. So I wanted to show you what that looks like. So I have this modal that shows up here, and I can click next and like launch a page within a page, which is pretty sweet. Which you couldn't do in Ionic v1. I think v3 you could, but it was a little more difficult. And on iOS, right, it does something different, right? If you launch a modal, it will slide. Oh, I didn't get my iOS. Sorry. Let's try that again. I got to actually put iOS on here. iPad. So if I launch it as an iPad, you'll notice I got round corners. My primary action button is on the far right. My cancel button is on the far left, which is different from material design, right? Material design has your cancel button right next to it's on the right side, but just to the left of it. And then when I push a new page, it actually slides in from the right? That's an iOS pattern. So you get the transitions automatically again from Android, and it just works. It's pretty cool. Questions so far? Anything? Is this interesting? So yeah, there it is on an iPhone, right? modals will take up the full screen. If you're on a desktop, I showed you that demo. It's going to sit in the center, right?
So I have a question. So
Yeah.
like you're saying like this is like the Android way, this is the iPhone way.
Yeah.
So I don't know what version of Ionic you're using, but like let's say you make Sworkit with a certain version of Ionic, 3 or 4, and you package it up. Will that only run on like certain versions of iOS and Android? Like,
no.
Is it like backward compatible? Because like things.
Yeah. So Ionic is just HTML, CSS, right? So the compatibility only has to do with your Cordova like plugin, right? So if you're using an old Cordova plugin that only works on newer or older devices, then the Cordova would be the problem, not Ionic.
Okay, so like,
right.
I mean, when you're programming, you're using a certain version of Cordova in this case.
None of this is with Cordova. So Sworkit right now, what we're doing is we're rewriting our web app using Ionic, and once we're done with the web app, we're going to replace our native app. So the goal being one code base to rule them all. So we'll write it once and we'll deploy it to iOS, Android, and the web.
Are you also asking, like, every year it seems like Apple changes some of the requirements for their apps, and so if you write this a year down the road, you might need to tweak a few of the imports or the plugins or the if you're using Fastly or whatever, you might have to tweak some of that, or tweak nothing, load it back into Xcode and rebuild it, and do something like that, because then it'll use the latest Xcode building. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
support the latest iOS.
So, yeah, and that's not really a limitation of Ionic. That's just like development in general. So, for example, I don't remember what iOS version it was, but they went from 32-bit to 64-bit, and like all the old apps, like were going to get deleted off the App Store if you didn't rebuild it in the 64-bit.
Okay, so it sounds like you make something with Ionic, and then you have to like go build it in Xcode for iPhone 4, for 5, for 6. You have to do it for every single one.
No, so the way Apple works is you submit one Xcode build, and you tell it what devices it's available for. So you can check iPad and iPhone, or you can just say no, this is only for iPhone. For Ionic apps, they're optimized for iPad or iPhone, so just check them all, and it'll run the build, and you deploy it that way.
Like you run the build on your server, or is Apple?
So you have to submit a build to Apple, and then you got to wait like 2 weeks before they approve you. So that's another story.
All right, that's fine. I'll figure it out.
So
Yeah.
does Ionic run with Cordova on the background? I mean, how do you get, for example, camera access or any native? Don't you have?
Yes, you do.
Cordova
Yeah.
plugins, don't you?
Yeah. So for right now we're rewriting just our web app. So Sworkit works on all your devices is our goal, right? So we have an Apple TV app, we have an iPhone app, Android app, and a web app. So currently our web app doesn't use Cordova because it doesn't need it, but our iOS and Android app does use Cordova plugins. It uses it for data storage. It uses it for like taking a picture, because you can upload a profile photo. We have a handful of Cordova plugins like that. We used to have ads in our app, so we had an ad Cordova plugin as well. So yes.
Get rid of Cordova and do it only with Ionic?
We'll still need Cordova to ship to the App Store. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, because I got confused because you said you're not going to use Cordova, or you're going.
Well, he's saying like the demo here, nothing here.
The demo here is not Cordova specific. It's all just Ionic components. Yeah, because they're web components. They're not Cordova components. Yeah.
Yeah, just changing subjects a little bit. I'm wondering about the use of a stencil. Why did you go with that? And I mean, what do you gain, right? And I'm guessing that you lose some things by not using Angular, or do you? I don't know.
Yeah. So for us, we weren't really tied to anything Angular specific, and stencil is the way that Ionic is building all of their components. And the cool thing that stencil is doing, and this is a topic for another day, but stencil basically, you write it in TypeScript and it compiles to vanilla JavaScript web components. So they are standards compliant web components that you're writing that work across all browsers. So if there's a new API or new something in the web that happens, stencil will handle that for me, and I'll just keep my same TypeScript that doesn't need to change, and let stencil handle that
So you
compilation.
write components in TypeScrict, like a class, like you would in Angular, very similar? Like
Yes, yeah, it's kind of a merge between Angular and React. If you look at how it's coded, I'm in love with it, but I'm biased. I'm in it all day, but it's pretty cool.
So also, shoot, I was gonna ask something else and I forgot. I'll ask later.
Yeah, if it comes up, interrupt me. Okay, so like presenting an alert is, I probably should have started with this one because it's a lot simpler. Really, you just say, here's the component I want to show, and you can, is this the, oh, this is actually a modal. This is not, I'm showing an example of an alert. But this is a simpler modal that all I need to do is present a workout settings screen. It doesn't have any like navigation within it. It just shows our workout settings, and then you can dismiss them. And so our workout settings just looks like this. Let's see if this will work. So if I go to my workout settings, this will slide up, right? And again, this is a modal that works on smaller devices, iPhone. It'll go full screen if it's on a phone, right? But that's probably the modal I should have started with. It's really simple. You just pass it the component. It's the view. It's just HTML or a web component there that you're passing it. For alerts, they are really, I don't have an alert example, but I'll just show you that these alerts look different from iOS to Android, right? And then lastly, if you have questions, let me know. But lastly, I want to show you some other cool things that Ionic is doing and that we're kind of taking advantage of. They have a new component called Ion Image, so I'm pretty sure this is new, that it lazy loads your image as it comes into the view. So on this screen we have probably 100 images, and as I scroll to them, you'll see in my network tab, these are only getting requested as soon as they come into view, and some of these are broken, but this is our beta, right?
That's cool.
Isn't that cool? Not only is it vertical, the web component is doing that for me. So all I do is Ion Image, and I give it a source, and it loads it once it comes into the view. It's using something called like an intersection observer, something like that, that is available on most browsers. Well, modern browsers. It even works for these horizontally scrolling ones. You'll notice as I come over, like it's loading these other images. So I have like 20 of these that don't need to be loaded because the user's not looking at them, right? And they come in really fast because they're right there. Pretty sweet. And then, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I remember the question I was going to say.
Great.
So the thing I had in mind, for example, was a router.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in Angular you have a router, and you can lazy load, components and stuff like that. Do you have that in Stencil? Or
So Ionic actually has a router.
Oh, Ionic has something.
Yeah. If you're using Angular, you'll use Angular's router, and then you'll use Ion Router Outlet. But Ionic has a router that lets us tie into the views and pass properties and stuff like that. And probably about 3 weeks ago now, we switched over to using Redux to handle all of our global state management, which has been an awesome way to like put all our data in one place and follow something more scalable and standard for us. So that's kind of how, that's what we use. We stencil and we use Redux to handle all our state, global state, I should say. Anything like view specific, we try to keep just in that view. But state that's managed across different views, we'll put in Redux.
So,
yeah.
Does that mean that if I download that app on my phone, I need an internet connection to see the pictures? Is that what that means? Or
So for this app right now, we cache things. We're using Service Worker to cache these images. So the goal is no, like you won't need an internet connection. However, like we're going to hit, we're still going to need to build a native app because we have lots of videos. Our exercise, we have 300 and something exercises, and even though they're short video clips, like we can't cache everything. I believe, I can't remember what the limit is, but iOS has a lower limit than Android does of what you can cache with Service Worker. But that's a good question because it made me remember this guy. If you come to, where is it? Is it here? Oh yeah, so we're using we started with the Ionic PWA toolkit. So this is actually a progressive web app. We set up our service worker. It is caching a lot of things. And as part of that, you can also, in the latest Chrome, I believe it's shipped in the latest Chrome. I might still be on the beta. But you can actually have a standalone app. So this guy is a standalone Sworkit app that like shows up in my toolbar and everything. Right here, Sworkit. So I launched this Sworkit app, and it will open up, assuming it works. But yeah, you can actually save, almost like you'd save a PWA to your home screen. You can save a Sworkit app to. I'm not sure why that one's not loading, but where'd it go? I lost my beta.sworkit. But yeah. The other thing I wanted to show was infinite scroll. So here's the vanilla JavaScript version of this. So it's probably more complicated than if you were to use Angular, right? But basically I call this render function, and I basically add items, add ion items every time I hit the infinite scroll. And then actually, here's where it goes. Here's my items. I start with, I think, 10. Yep. We get the lists, and the list is right here. It's just empty to begin with. And then find the infinite scroll component that's on the page. And anytime that component is hit, I'm going to get the data and complete the infinite scroll. Do I need to zoom in on this? You guys see that? So in Angular, you just do some one-way or two-way bindings on those functions to call the data. But as you scroll down, you'll hit a bubble, right, and it'll load 10 more, load 10 more. And a prettier example is one of these is an app I'm just doing on the side. It's a budget app. But as I scroll down, it like automatically gets more transactions that slide into place. So I'm only loading 10 at a time, but it's almost like I'm just scrolling forever, right? Then the last one I wanted to show, I already showed you the nested navigation. Last one I wanted to show was virtual scroll. We have in our app, and I wish I have a video. Maybe I'll share the video later. But in our app, we have 300 exercises that we load to create a custom workout. So when I open this modal, in fact, I'm going to show it this way because it actually loads better. When we show this modal, I actually have to request 300 exercises, and they come with quite a bit of data. And imagine trying to render 300 components in the DOM. Before adding virtual scroll, I would launch this, and it would be black. It'd wait a second, and then the modal would show up. With virtual scroll, you saw it's instantaneous. It shows up as soon as, and I have this nice like loading screen in between. It's too fast. Sorry. But if you look at this component, that's not where I want to go. Here's my virtual scroll component. Here's my exercise item. There's actually only 10 in the view, and so as I scroll, it feels like I'm on a normal Ion scroll element or Ion content, but really it's just repositioning these 10 plus. I guess it's a little more than 10. 10 plus items, right? So super fast. I can scroll through 300 exercises, no problem, and my load time is instantaneous, virtually instantaneous.
So the infinite scroll just adds appends.
So this is an infinite
this is
scroll.
Virtual scroll.
Yeah.
And it manages delete stuff off the top. And
yep. So it keeps the 10 or 12. It calculates how many DOM elements it needs to cover the view plus some. And then it'll replace the data and let it scroll. You can see that it's moving it through like a translate 3D, but it feels like I'm scrolling it, right? But yeah, the infinite scroll is like if I need to get async data from the server, right? It's pulling new data. This is all 300 are loaded at once in this case. Is there a question back here?
No.
Oh, okay.
So I saw a little like a tiny scroll bar, or was that my imagination?
Yeah, that little scroll bar is a Chrome thing. So
It's a Chrome thing.
yeah, I think on if it's actually Chrome, it'll show a bigger one. No, it doesn't show it there. Maybe maybe they're emulating iOS or something. I don't think so. I could be wrong.
Because I was wondering how you said it's, okay, 300 were loaded already, so it knows how many total it has, right?
Yep.
And that's how it tracks.
Yeah, so if you're loading like a big table of elements, like a spreadsheet or something, like this would be great, right? You could scroll through all the data without having to have that many DOM elements, which really slows down rendering.
And is that data, it's still like in the app kept in a Redux store or something like that? So you don't have to go out to the server again and pull it all down.
Right. So now that I've loaded these, it comes up even faster, right?
Yeah.
So they're there already. There's no loading state. In fact, I want to see if I can get that loading state back. It might be because it's already cached from the service worker. Yeah, I might. Oh no, I got them. There it is. Exercises got. It just happened fast. Sorry. There should be a little loading screen in there.
So it doesn't render until you get to 300, or does it start to render before?
It renders before that. So in fact, I'll show you. Oh, I can't do it because I'm recording right now. The way I debug things like this, because I'm really nitpicky with my details, I'll actually get QuickTime out and I'll record it and load it, and then like frame by frame see what happens as the DOM comes in. That way I know that I don't get any weird jank. Like when I first started loading these pages, the workouts themselves took a second to load, so I have this nice like this ghost image, right? Your Wi-Fi is too fast here. I can't get my ghost to stay long enough. But there was a little bit of a blip, like it would be a ghost image and then it would blip. So I was trying to figure out what that blip was, and so I was able to fix it, debugging with QuickTime. Oh, that's what I need to do. I just need to slow this down. Let's emulate this.
Is it under network?
Network, yes. And then I just gotta slide this guy over.
Yeah.
Slow 3G.
There you go.
But the problem is like slow 3G is really slow, so we'll see how long it takes. That might have been cached. Let me see if if the other ones aren't cached. There we go. So there's my nice glowing skeleton screen. And then once the data gets there, it'll show up instantly.
Do the web components come with the preloading screen like that, or do you have to create that?
So Ionic does have a skeleton like template. I didn't use it because I wanted them to line up exactly with my elements. So I have this title header and subtext. So I wanted them to look like that and match up. But yeah, there is another component that you could use there. That's it. That's all I've got. Any other questions, V4 or otherwise?
So all those features, those would be available through Angular as well. You didn't have to use.
Yeah.
So they're all Ionic 4.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah, everything I've showed off was Ionic specific components. So you'll be able to get that in any framework in the not so distant future. And Angular is the first one that they're building. I think that's what's delaying the beta release is making sure that Angular works the way they want it to. So, thanks guys.
Cool stuff.